Ladies and gentlemen, you are to disregard the witness's previous answer to the questions that were propounded to him right before we took the recess. And this is what we're going to read in part of his deposition, and Mr. Beach will follow up.
Your Honor, you said questions, you meant
Question.
One question.
Question. Were letters of intent acceptable to the bank for the first building? Answer, I do not know. Again, I do not know. The agreement on the front end was we would do the site work and build the first building with the information we had in hand. To build the second building, they needed leases on both the second building and more leases on the first building.
And sir, is that still your testimony today?
Yes, sir.
So, when this loan closed on October 21st, 2005, the bank was prepared to proceed with the construction of Building 1 that was already underway with the information it had about letters of intent and leases.
I believe it was.
And the bank knew before it closed the loan that building number 5 was going to be Hawk's Nest Restaurant, didn't it?
Building number...
The restaurant building.
No, we knew there was... I believe we were told it was going to be sold to a restaurateur.
Could you turn in the fifth third binder to Exhibit 44H?
Okay.
Do you see that email?
Looks like there's two emails, yes.
There's a September 28th email from Mr. Speck to Mr. Plank.
Yes.
And Mr. Speck was speaking as the commercial real estate lender, the relationship manager for the bank, wasn't he?
Correct.
And Mr. Speck knew that you, meaning Rich, are going to occupy the second building with the restaurant and banquet facility, didn't he?
I'm sorry, I was reading when you were asking the question.
So he says, I know you are going to occupy the second building with the restaurant and banquet facility, didn't he?
Yes.
So the bank knew on September 28th that the place we're going to occupy the restaurant building, with the restaurant and banquet facility.
I wouldn't say that's... He knew the planks were. He knew the developer, City Center, was going to put a restaurant and banquet facility in that second building.
Well, that's not what Mr. Speck testified to, was it?
I don't recall what Mr. Speck testified.
And this email is addressed to Rich, isn't it?
It is.
You is Rich, right?
You as Rich as City Center.
Let's turn to the white book, the City Center book. You look at tab 39.
Okay.
That's an internal Fifth Third document, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
From what date?
October 18th, 2005.
And it's drafted by, is it John Olson?
think that's right.
Who is John Olson?
John Olson is an internal review appraiser for the bank.
So, Mr. Olson reviewed this information on City Center.
Yes.
And he's a representative of Fifth Third Bank, isn't he?
Yes, he has a clerical function for the bank.
Well, he's an appraiser, isn't he? He's an MAI appraiser.
He is.
That's more than just a clerical function, isn't it?
He's not a third-party appraiser. He performs a clerical function for the bank, reviewing these appraisals.
When you say clerical, you're not talking like a secretary or administrative assistant. This is a registered appraiser that works for the bank.
Correct.
And October the 14th, he knew that the only space with a foreseeable tenant is the subject restaurant, which constitutes 21,600 square feet, or 27.53 of the 78,459 square foot center, and that tenant will be the owner of the center. Is that true?
That's what it says, yes.
So would you agree that Fifth Third knew that Mr. Plank was going to occupy Hawk's Nest before they closed on the loan?
I would say Mr. Olson knew that. I don't know that Mr. Specht knew that.
Well, you have Mr. Speck's September 28th email. It says you to Rich. And now you've got Mr. Olson's email who says the owner of the center. Who is the owner of the center?
City Center.
And it's going to be a tenant, right? It's a lease.
Correct.
Now, you've testified that the bank has at its discretion to accept or reject any lease it wants.
Yes.
Would the bank, in its practice, close on a loan if the tenant of the building that it's going to construct is unacceptable?
We didn't close on the construction loan for that building.
So you would agree that if this lease for the owner to occupy the subject building as a restaurant is unacceptable, the bank in its business practice wouldn't close the loan on October 21st.
I do not believe we closed the loan for that particular building on October 21st.
Well, didn't the loan include this building?
It did.
Building 6? And wasn't Building 6 going to be Hawk's Nest?
At this point in time, I don't know if the bank knew that was going to be Hawk's Nest. But at the time the original loan closed, that building was not supposed to be under construction.
Well, the appraisal, or the verification by the bank's internal appraiser is talking about the only foreseeable tenant. He's talking about this project, isn't he?
He is.
So this project, phase 1, that the bank is financing, the only foreseeable tenant is the owner who's going to occupy a full building with a restaurant.
Correct.
And with that information, Fifth Third went ahead and signed the loan documents on October 21st.
Correct.
And proceeded with the loan.
Yes.
Now, do I understand your testimony that in the spring and summer of 2006, the plaintiffs occupying this building is not acceptable to the bank?
Yes.
Would you expect that a bank, your bank, would raise that objection sometime in the 10 months between October 24th and July 2006?
Sorry, what was that again?
Well, you talked earlier about you used to work in Wall Street banking,
Yes.
and you went to a community bank because you wanted to do ethical banking.
I didn't like what the Wall Street Bank was doing.
Did you consider it ethical to know about this tenant and this lease in October 14, 2005 and wait until July to raise it as a breach or default?
I wouldn't think it ethical to not tell the bank that you were going to occupy that building, or to tell the bank you were going to sell that building.
So that wasn't my question. Can you answer my question?
Do I think it's unethical?
Yes.
I believe the bank did raise a problem with the leases before July.
Well, I'm talking about this lease.
I don't know if we had the leases. I don't know when we got that lease.
You knew on October 14th that this was the plan for the building. The owner's going to occupy another restaurant.
At this point in time, we knew that someone from City Center had told the third-party appraiser they were going to lease that building, lease that building for a restaurant and banquet center.
And this isn't a third-party appraiser. This is your internal person.
My internal person is reviewing work done by a third-party appraiser. And the way he gains that knowledge is by reading that report from a third-party appraiser. That third-party appraiser was told that information by someone from City Center. At this point in time, that City Center is not told the bank that there's a lease, they're going to build that building and hold it for their own interest. The bank has been told, Mr. Specht has been told, that second building is being sold to a restaurateur.
Well, didn't we just look at the email from Mr. Specht, September 28th? He said you were going to occupy this for the restaurant and banquet facility?
Yes.
And now we're looking at another Fifth Third representative who says the owner's going to occupy it with a restaurant as a tenant,
Yes.
not selling it, a tenant.
Correct.
But you're telling this jury that the bank didn't know that Mr. Plank was going to occupy the building as a tenant with a 21,600 square foot restaurant.
I'm telling you that Mr. Plank had told the bank he was selling that building to a restaurateur.
That's not what this says, is it?
No, that's not what that says.
And this is 7 days before the loan closed.
Correct.
So the bank knew, didn't they, that Mr. Plank, as the owner, was going to be the tenant.
The bank knew at that point in time that we had been given two pieces of conflicting information on that building.
You're talking about the credit memo from Mr. Specht,
Yes.
but the credit memo that Mr. Specht drafted is different than the email he sent to Rich, isn't it?
No. You can read that email as him saying he knows City Center is going to put a restaurant in that property.
Well, let's go back and look at 44H again.
Where, Red Book?
Redwood.
It'll just take a minute.
This is an email to Rich. Yeah, you agree?
Yes, I do.
Where Mr. Specht says, I know you are going to occupy the second building with a restaurant and banquet facility. And you think you could be Rich or City Center.
Right.
That's not some third-party restaurateur in Chicago, is it?
No.
So Mr. Specht knew on September 28th that you, Rich or City Center, was going to occupy this building as a restaurant.
I read that knowing what the bank approval documents say is that City Center is going to put a restaurant in that second building. We know Mr. Plank has told the bank he's going to put a restaurant in that second building with a restaurateur, and he's selling that building to them.
You are going to occupy means you're selling it to a third-party restaurateur in Chicago.
I don't know where the restaurateur is from.
Well, he doesn't say sell, does he? He says occupy.
Yeah.
Are you telling the jury you think occupy is the same as sell?
No. I read that as Mr. Plank is going to put a restaurant in that second building. I don't read that as Mr. Plank is the restaurant in that second building.
And you've reviewed the lease. You don't need to go back to it again, page tab 39. That certainly talks about the owner as the tenant. No ambiguity there, is there?
No, I don't believe so.
Possibly will conclude.
Was there any ambiguity to you?
I don't believe so.
So the bank knew in October, in September, that there's a restaurant, a place you're going to occupy, and funded this loan for 10 months, didn't it?
No, we didn't know the Planks were going to break. Again, Mr. Plank told us he was selling it to a restaurateur. That's what we knew going into the loan.
Assume that Mr. Speck means what this says. I know you are going to occupy the second building with the restaurant banquet facility, and assume that that's consistent with tab 39 in the white book. Where Mr. Olson says the only space for the foreseeable tenant is the subject restaurant, and that tenant will be the owner of the center. If those refer to the same person, that you as Mr. Plank or City Center, these two bank employees know that Plank is going to have the restaurant.
If you want me to assume your interpretation, yes, that's correct.
That the owner is City Center or Plank, and that he's going to be a tenant.
Yes. If you want me to assume your interpretation, yes.
And after that, knowing that fact, the bank continued to fund for 10 months before saying, now we've got a problem.
The bank continued to fund the loan, yes.
Let's turn to tab 6A in the white book, page 192. It's the May 19th email from this Speck.
Was it 192?
6A.
Number 2.
That's not what mine looks like. I'm sorry.
6A 192. 192.
That's Ms. Steiger's email to Mary at Hawk on May 19th, isn't it?
Yes.
Did you see point number 2? Ms. Steiger's asking for proof of the equity, $210,000 for a total of $840,000 for buildings number 1, 3, 5, and 6, in which Fifth Third deposit account of these funds being held in escrow.
Yes.
You would agree that City Center didn't need to have $840,000 in escrow at Fifth Third as of May 19th, wouldn't you?
I believe by that point in time, the $210,000 in equity is already in that first building that's being constructed.
So you would
We went
agree?
over that. Yeah, I think we went over that.
Yep. So Ms. Steiger is wrong to request $840,000 in an escrow account from City Center, isn't she?
Yes.
And to delay funding for that would be against the loan documents, wouldn't it?
No. She has a question. She's just started looking at the file and reviewing the relationship, and she has a question.
So that wasn't my question. My question was to withhold funding of the loan because you're requiring $840,000 in an escrow account on May 19th would be against the loan documents, wouldn't it?
I do not know. Are buildings 1, 3, 5, and 6 under construction at this point in time?
Well, you're the 30B6 representative. You've seen what was going on. You know what the status was. You've heard the testimony all week.
Can we look at the inspection report from
You know
on
that
May 19th?
this was for 4 buildings, right?
Yes.
And there's already $210,000 that's been taken out for a building.
Was put in an equity for the first building under construction, correct?
You can't request it twice, can you?
For the same building, no, you cannot.
And to request it twice for the same building would be against the loan documents.
Correct.
And to hold up funding on May 19th, if you're requesting it twice, would be against the loan documents.
So hold up fund, yes, to be requiring the same amount of equity that's already been injected in the first building would be against the loan documents. It's not needed.
And May is when the mechanics lien got placed on City Center, isn't it? From the delay in payment to the subs.
No, there was a lien placed on City Center, I think it was May, because Hawk didn't pay their vendors, their suppliers, I should say.
Well, for the brick suppliers for this project.
And others, yes.
Now, you were the 30B6 representative. You had to understand how these equity contributions were supposed to be made before your deposition, didn't you?
Yeah, I guess.
I mean, you weren't just testifying as Sean Keller. You were the representative. You went through the documents. You met with counsel. You were prepared to address these issues.
Yes.
And you understood how the bank thought the equity was to be handled. Right?
I believe so.
And you believed that as of May, only $210,000 was required since the inception of the loan, didn't you?
I don't know if you'd like me to read it.
Sure. Go ahead and page 1.
Okay.
And you see, I asked you about the email we had up on the screen. Does the bank consider this notice to be a default? You see that? Line 14.
Line 14. Question, okay, that email from Joanne Steiger to Marriott Hawk dated May 19, 2006, does the bank consider that to be a notice of default?
Right.
Answer.
And the answer, I consider this a notice to the borrower, yes, and there are issues with the project. That was your answer.
Yes.
And I asked you, is issues with the project notice with default? And you answered, at that point in time, I said, we've got questions. We don't know. We don't know if it's a default or not. It looks like we're asking for the proof to show it's not. See that? So I'm asking you about this email that's up on the screen, aren't I?
Yes.
And I asked you, did the bank expect City Center to inject $840,000 of equity as of May 19, 2006? You see that?
Yes.
And what was your answer?
I believe the bank expected there to be at least $210,000 of equity for that second building injected at that point in time.
So after reviewing all of these documents and preparing for your deposition as the representative of the bank, you understood that it was $210,000 that needed to be injected for the second building.
At least $210,000.
Not for the first, for the second.
I believe the bank expected there to be at least $210,000 of equity for that second building injected at that point in time.
Right. Not 420,000, 210.
For the second building.
Right.
It's already 210 for the first building.
Well, let's go on. Then I ask you the next question. So the bank expected $420,000 of equity injected in the project at that point in time? Is that my question?
Yes.
And what was your answer?
No, from the initial closing, an additional $110,000 from that point. 210 specifically for the second building.
So the bank's position as of May 19th was $210,000 since inception of the loan, wasn't it?
All right, Jack, this states the answer.
Isn't that what you just told me?
Sorry, I kept reading. Which one did you want me to read?
Didn't you just answer from the initial closing, an additional $210,000 from that point? $210,000 specifically for the second building.
Yes.
And didn't I clarify again, you weren't talking $420,000 total, it was $210,000 total, wasn't it?
Answer, no, from the initial closing, an additional $210,000 from that point. 210 specifically for that second building.
So
Question.
the initial closing was on October 21st,
Your Honor, can you let the...
but that was the answer we've gotten from
Yeah,
you.
but he was going to go on and explain more, I think.
I didn't have a question beyond that yet. The initial closing on October 21st. And since that date until May 19th, the bank's position was $210,000.
My answer, from the initial closing, an additional $210,000 from that point. 210 specifically for that second building. I was talking about that second building, 210,000.
And nothing more since closing.
We've already established that there was supposed to be 210,000 for
Well,
the first building.
You were the bank's representative, you reviewed the documents, you prepared for this deposition. In the next question I asked you, 210 for the first building, 210 for the second building? What did you tell me?
No, there was a separate equity requirement to open the loan, and then there was an additional $210,000 for each building that was to be constructed.
So I specifically asked you whether it was 210 for the first and 210 for the second, didn't I?
You asked me 210 for the first building, 210 for the second building. I said, no, there's a separate equity requirement to open the loan, and then there was an additional 210 for each building that was to be constructed.
And you opened the loan with $630.
Correct, for the dirt.
And you're telling me now there was only $210,000 additional, not $420.
No, I'm telling you, there's a separate equity requirement to open the loan. Then there was an additional 210 for each building that was to be constructed.
Well, as of May 19th, I asked you, so they expected $420,000 equity injected in the project. You told me no, didn't you? And I asked you, do you need 210 for the first building and 210 for the second? You told me no, didn't you?
I told you there was equity to open the loan and then 210 for each building to be constructed.
Sir, I asked you, so the bank expected $420,000 equity injected in the project at that point, May 19th.
Objection.
You told me no.
He's asked his question.
He's not answering,
Your
Your
Honor.
Honor. It's not responsive.
Let him answer.
I've read the same question and answer to you. Your question, line 5, so the bank expected $420,000 of equity injected in the project at that point. Answer, line 7, no. From the initial closing, an additional $210,000 from that point. 210 specifically for that second building. Question, 210 for the first building, 210 for the second building? Answer, no. There was a separate equity requirement to open the loan, and then there was an additional 210 for each building that was to be constructed.
So, on May the 14th, 2009, as the bank's representative who has reviewed all these documents, met with counsel, was prepared to testify what the bank required, you understood that no, only $210,000 additional equity as of May 19th. I'm sorry, May 14th, 2009.
I think that's what it reads.
That was the bank's position.
Bank's position, separate equity required to open the loan.
The $630,000, right?
What?
The $630,000, open the loan.
300.
Objection.
So I'm sorry, $360,000. I stand correct. Stand close to the numbers. $360,000.
Right. So that's to open the loan, and then an additional $210 for each building that was to be constructed.
So $360 plus $210. $570 as of May the 14th. I'm sorry, May the 19th. That's what your testimony on May the 14th.
Well, my testimony says $210,000 for each building that was to be constructed. So at that point in time, how many buildings are being constructed?
We've heard it 3 times to the jury now. I think they've heard it, what you said. And indeed, there is no written request to City Center for an equity injection after May 19th, is there?
Objection. Calls for extrinsic evidence. There's no requirement in loan documents for a written request.
What was the question?
I said there is no record of a request from Fifth Third for another equity injection after May 19th, is there?
That you object, you still object?
No, he rephrased the question
All right.
correctly, Your Honor.
You're asking if there is a written record asking for additional equity after May 19th.
Yeah, say I need another $210,000.
I do not know. I would assume, looking at the emails we've seen all week, those emails talked about equity, but I don't know without looking at them again.
But we talked, and I'm not going to ask the jury to pull out these emails again, but Mr. Speck back in draw number 2 said we require $210,000 of equity. We're going to reduce this from draw number 2 and saying out this is how we're going to do it. You recall that, don't you?
We didn't reduce the draw. We funded what we were supposed to under the draw, and the city center funded what they were supposed to under the draw.
Okay. You recall Mr. Speck explaining how they were going to take the $210,000 of equity from draw 2. Recall that?
I recall city center, yes, the email saying city center had to put in $210,000 in equity plus cost overruns in draw
Right.
2.
$759,000 minus the $210,000 and the overruns equals $450,000.
Yeah. Shows how much the bank was required to fund.
So Mr. Speck told City Center, we need $210,000, here's how we're going to do it, and he got it done. Nobody from Fifth Third did that after May 19th, did they?
Ms. Steiger is asking for it right now.
Well, she's asking for $840,000 in an escrow account.
Yes.
My question was after May 19th. Is there any record that you've seen as the bank's representative where someone said to City Center, hey, we need you to put $210,000 in equity in. We're going to reduce your next draw by $210,000.
Someone said there were 6,000 pieces of paper. I don't remember all the emails, when they were dated and what they said. I apologize for that.
Now, we've talked at length about draw number 7. You recall draw number 7? That was the one in July.
Yes. I don't think we've talked about it yet, but it's been talked about this
In
week.
this courtroom this week, it's been talked about at what happened.
Yes.
And you recall seeing that City Center submitted a draw request where the total project cost was $9.4 million.
Yes.
and you've seen the email from Ms. Steiger with the revised one that reduced it to 6.129 million.
Yes.
And the bank has no idea why it did that reduction, does it?
I believe it was done to try and track more accurately what was under construction at that point in time. The first and second buildings plus the site work.
Let's go back to your deposition. You go to page 263. Actually, let's start on page 262.
I don't have it.
Oh, I'm sorry, it's the second part here. You see, I asked you, would you agree there are also significant changes to the total contract?
262.
Yes, in the sworn statement that was revised by Joanne Steiger. What was your answer?
I'm sorry, I haven't caught up to where you're at yet. What line?
13.
13 on 262?
Yes.
13. Would you agree there was also significant changes to the total contract in the sworn statement that was revised by Joanne Steiger? Answer. The total contract, yes, was $9,400,000 and now it's $6,000,001. I'll keep going.
Sure.
And just so we're clear, $9,400,358 was what was submitted by Hawk on July 13th as indicated on Exhibit 28 and 29. Answer. If Exhibit 29 was the attachments to Exhibit 28, yes. Question. And that's the same total contract for this city center development since the inception of the loan in October 2005, correct? Answer. Correct. Question. Ms. Steiger's revised statement in Exhibit 31 has reduced the amount to $6,129,762.58. Do you see that? Yes. Question. Why was that reduced? Answer. I do not know.
So you didn't know why Fifth Third reduced the amount from 9.4 million to 6.1 million, did you?
On June 4th, 2009, no, it does not appear that I did so.
And again, you were there as a representative of Fifth Third to speak for the bank, having reviewed all the documents and met with your counsel.
Correct.
You would agree that City Center couldn't possibly have completed 4 buildings for $6.1 million, could it?
No, not at all.
And you'd agree that there was nothing in the construction loan agreement that allowed the bank to unilaterally reduce the total contract from 9.4 million to 6.1, is there?
Contract?
Construction loan agreement? It was for $9.4 million, wasn't it?
No, the budget was for $9.4 million.
Right.
The loan agreement was for 8.2
8.2.
$8.2 million. So you're saying the bank had no right to reduce?
The total cost of the project is $6.1 million.
No, we weren't party to the contracts that totaled up to the $9.4 million.
Well, you were going to loan $8.2 million on a $9.1 million project, right?
Correct. We still are at this point in time.
Well, according to the sworn statement in Cap 7, you were only going to lend 1.6, right?
No, there was no amendment to the loan agreement.
Let's look at the white binder then, it's tab 7. I'm looking at page 247. That's the email that Mr. Mary from Hawks sent to Joanne Steiger on July 14th, isn't it?
Which, I'm sorry, where is
Tab 7.
it? Tab 7A. I was supposed to... Joe email?
There's a Mary email.
Page 247.
What, I'm sorry, what page was it?
247.
247.
247. From Mary to Joanne, July 13th,
Yes.
2006.
And let's look at the sworn statement that Mr. Hill submitted. On 251. What was the balance due on the loan on Mr. Keogh's statement?
Balance due column
At the bottom.
totaled $4,165,060.35.
And then let's go back and look at Ms. Steiger's email. Page 258. That's her email, isn't it?
From Joanne to Mary, July 26, 2006.
And go to the next page. That's the attachment, isn't it?
That is the attachment.
And what's the balance due on Joanne's revised form?
$1,602,500.19.
So she's reduced from 4.1 million to 1.6. The balance due.
On the contractor statement, yes.
And you agree that you couldn't complete City Center Phase 1 for $1.6 million, wouldn't you?
Correct.
That sworn, it's been revised and prepared by this Steiger, puts the City Center in a position where it can't possibly complete this project.
The whole project, yes. Can I complete the whole project for $1.6 million?
Now, typically draws like this are funded in 5 to 7 days after you receive the sworn statement, aren't they?
There's a lot of work that goes into it, but 5 to 7 days once we have all the information, yes.
And that's important that you're timely, because if you're not, subs get nervous.
Subs get nervous. There's potential for liens. You're correct.
And if you delay, subs will place lien on the project long term.
Correct. They have lien rights. They don't get paid.
And that's what happened to City Center in May of 2006.
That I do not know.
You
I know there was a lien placed on City Center, I believe for non-payment of materials purchased by Hawk. I think is what the lien was for. That, and it attached other projects Hawk was working on as well.
Well, City Center had goods that had been provided, brick, that weren't paid for. Correct?
Correct.
And that's why the subs placed the lien.
Correct.
That's all the questions I have.
Mr. Gallagher,
Yes.
from October 24th, 2005, up until today, was Fifth Third willing to loan City Center $8.2 million as long as they were in compliance with their loan?
Yes.
That has never changed, has it?
No.
Remember Mr. Beach asking you some questions about the loan document and how it doesn't say anything about residential?
Yes.
And he only pointed you to Exhibit 4 in the black book, which is the real estate and construction loan agreement. If you could please turn to section 5.2 of that loan agreement.
5.2, yes.
Just a minute. It defines under 5.2 what this project is, doesn't it?
Yes, it does.
Could you read to the jury 5.2?
5.2 says project. The word project, as used in this agreement, means the construction and completion of the development and infrastructure improvements on the real estate for the first phase of the planned unit development, consisting of 6 commercial sites located along Broadway Avenue and 113th Avenue, Crown Point, Indiana, 46307, and the vertical construction of 4 two-story buildings, with the first story as retail space and the second story as office space, and all improvements contemplated by this agreement, including without limitation the erection of the building or structures on the real property identified in writing by borrower to lender, and all other work necessary to make the project usable and complete for the intended purpose.
If Mr. Plank would have read this agreement, he would have known that the project only dealt with retail on the first floor, office on the second floor.
Correct.
And that was the definition set out in the loan agreement. Now you can turn to Article 10, which is on page 7.
Definitions.
All right, go to the definition of building and read it to us, please.
Building. The word building means a structure erected on the real property for the purpose of leasing to office or retail tenants.
The loan documents, if Mr. Plank would have read it, the definition of building tells us what tenants could be in there.
Correct.
Okay, and what tenants are allowed to be in the building's fifth third is financed for $8.2 million.
Office or retail.
Mr. Beach talked to you a minute ago about the different internal memos, the credit memo and so forth, or the appraisal memo, which said about tenants and so forth. Did the bank have any problem with a restaurant going in there as long as when the construction was done, that the building would be taken out?
The second building that was constructed?
Yes.
No. We didn't have a problem with that.
If you could turn to the red book real quick. Exhibit 33. Okay. Exhibit 33 is a ledger that has been produced by City Center's attorneys just recently, and it shows what money...
Objection, that mischaracterizes when this was produced. This was produced years ago.
I got it 2 weeks ago, Your Honor.
That's not correct.
That's right, Your Honor. Let's just move on. This document was prepared by City Center. It's a ledger of the money going in and out of City Center in 2005 and 6, 2006 and 7. Could you go down to the first page, which is starting in December 2005 through June 2006, And can you identify any deposits for any tenants?
Can I go through column 2
Yes.
and find deposits from tenants?
Yes.
Excuse me. December 22nd, 2005, 2-month security deposit, Anytime Fitness, $11,655.
Go to the next page.
This is what you're looking for. 8/4/2006, rent number 1, Cold Stone, $2,360.43. Sorry.
That was the first rental payment that City Center received for any tenants out there at City Center complex, correct?
That is the first rent the first rent I've seen in this ledger. I'm going to keep going.
Now, I'd like to ask you this question. Please tell the ladies and gentlemen of the jury each deposit that either Rachel made for payment for her space or that Rich Plank made for his space that he took up in building 2. We are running through the first page. There's none on the first page. Find any deposits of any rent that Rich paid or any rent that Rachel paid.
I see something that says Plank, October 23rd. I don't know the year I'm in anymore. I think it's 07. Plank, October 23rd, 07, $835.
Well, that surely isn't $2,000 that the lease says, right?
No. That's it.
If you can go real quick to the white book. Exhibit 38, page 12 of that document, which is date stamp 1320.
Exhibit 38, page 12, 13, 20.
Yes.
Okay.
Can you tell the ladies and gentlemen, the jury, when Trainer and Associates prepared an appraisal prior to this closing, how the property was zoned?
Property was zoned.
Yes.
It says zoning B3 business.
Real quickly, if we could go to the White Book, Exhibit 2B.
Sorry. B.
Yeah, date stamp page 23. You have to turn your book sideways because it's in there sideways.
23.
Now this is actually an application for payment number 2, right?
Correct.
Okay, but if you go to column D, it shows what was paid at the first draw, or the closing of October 24, 2005.
Correct. Column D, work completed from previous applications.
If you add up all those numbers, they total 971, 764.
Correct.
And that's the same number we went over earlier, that's the amount of work that was approved by First Indiana.
Correct.
All right. And then we went over that uses and source diagram as to what the bank was required to fund and what they weren't required to fund.
Yes.
Okay, so let's go to item 1 is land, 95,000. Circle, 95,000. If that is an expense that the bank is required to fund or not required to fund.
Not required to fund.
Okay. Circle under permits, $4,042 if the bank was required to fund that, or if the bank was not required to fund that.
Not required to fund that.
Okay. Next, surveys, $18,000. Were they required to fund that?
No, not required to fund that.
Architect site work, were they required to fund that?
No, not required to fund that.
Architect building, were they required to fund that?
No, the bank was not required to fund that.
Wetland, is the bank required to fund that?
No, the bank was not required to fund that either.
So if we total up those numbers, I'm going to cheat because I got the slide from earlier. 971. All right. Those ones you just circled, the bank's not required to fund. 189. Minus. And then if you remember, we subtract out another 170, right?
Correct.
And why did we subtract out that 170?
Because City Center had to have $360,000 cash into the project.
So these two numbers total 360.
Yes.
611 is what the bank was required to fund at the first draw. Did they do that?
Yes, we did.
Does it really matter what the zoning of the buildings were at the city center complex?
Yes.
Why?
Why? What we're building has to comply with the zoning.
And as long as it complies with the zoning, the bank will fund it, assuming that that is what the permitted use is under the loan documents.
Correct.
If City Center wanted to build a residential building here that wasn't being funded by the bank, they were allowed to do so, right?
Correct.
If City Center wanted to, and I'm referring to Claims Exhibit 100, if City Center wanted to build a residential building here, as long as it wasn't funded by the bank, they had no problem with that.
Bank had no problem with that.
Building 7, 8, and 9 down here, if they wanted to build residential buildings, the bank had no problem with that.
No, had no problem with that.
So long as there's no residential in buildings 1, 2, 3, and 6.
Correct.
Let's talk a minute. It's you were. You remember there were 2 letters of intent for the restaurant? Remember that testimony yesterday?
For the second building?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. One was Joanna Botterman, right?
Yes.
And the other one was Theodora Seopoulos?
Yes.
I have no further questions.
No questions, Your Honor.
Ladies and gentlemen, at this time, you can ask the defense, the witness any questions.